She was the future of the British crown, the only legitimate grandchild of King George III. But at 21, her life ended suddenly, and those placed to watch her on her father's orders received one of the strangest rewards in royal history, a gleaming set of Peridots. Who were they? Why Peridots? And how did this unusual gift survive, hidden away for 2 centuries? Today, we'll follow that story and trace the rare journey of royal Peridots from Imperial Vienna to modern queens. Before we begin, please support my channel by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you. To really understand the story of these Peridots, we need to step back into the turbulent world of the British court in the early 19th century. It was a time of great uncertainty and, frankly, great scandal. The king, George III, was lost to the world, hidden away at Windsor in his shadowy struggle with mental illness. His son, the Prince Regent, the future King George IV, was in charge. He was a man of exquisite taste, but also of legendary extravagance and a deeply scandalous private life. His greatest scandal was his own marriage. He was forced into it for political reasons, to Caroline of Brunswick, and their first meeting has gone down in history as a catastrophe. He took one look at her, turned to his attendant, and reportedly said, "I am not well. Pray get me a glass of brandy." She, in turn, was equally unimpressed with him. Their mutual dislike was immediate, profound, and permanent. Their only child, Princess Charlotte, was born directly into the center of the storm. From the moment she entered the world, she was less a beloved daughter and more a pawn in her parents' bitter personal war. She was the nation's great hope, the only legitimate grandchild of the king, and the direct heir to the throne after her father. The public adored her, seeing in her a vibrant, hopeful future, a stark contrast to her unstable grandfather and her deeply unpopular father. But this public adoration did little to protect her at home. Her father quickly took complete control of her upbringing, forbidding her mother almost any role in her life. Charlotte grew up in a gilded cage, under his strict and watchful eye. Her life was managed by a series of governesses and ladies-in-waiting who were chosen not for their warmth, but for their loyalty to the Prince Regent. By the time she was a teenager, these attendants were less like companions and more like guards. Her constant companions during this period were the Dowager Countess of Rosslyn and 2 sisters, Charlotte and Lucy Coates. Princess Charlotte, who had a rather sharp and unforgiving wit, had a cutting way of describing them. She called the frail countess and the 2 sisters Famine and the Consequences. It gives you a little window into how she must have felt. Constantly observed, her every move, every word reported back to her father. The pressure finally became too much in 1814. Her father had arranged a marriage for her with Prince William of Orange, a man she simply refused to marry. On a dramatic July evening, she did the unthinkable for a princess of her standing. She ran out of the house, hailed a public hackney cab on the street, and fled to her mother's residence. It was an astonishing act of rebellion. The court was thrown into chaos. It took hours of frantic persuasion by some of the most powerful men in the country, including the Lord Chancellor, to convince her to return. She did, but after that night, her confinement became even stricter. Her one true escape came 2 years later, in 1816, when she was finally allowed to marry for love. Her choice was the handsome, if not terribly wealthy, Prince Leopold of Saxe-Coburg. Theirs was a genuine love match, and for a brief time she was blissfully happy. The nation celebrated with her, and with her marriage, the duties of her observation group, the ladies who had watched her so closely, were finally over. And it was for their service, for those years of keeping his daughter in line, that George, the Prince Regent, decided on a reward. He commissioned the premier royal jewelers of the day, Rundle, Bridge, and Rundle, to create 2 beautiful sets of jewelry for the Coates sisters. The original invoice from April 3, 1816, still exists in the Royal Archives at Windsor. It meticulously lists a set of amethyst jewelry priced at £298 and a set of Peridot jewelry, which at the time was still often called by its ancient name chrysolite, costing £240 and 9 shillings. The Prince Regent's own sister, Princess Elizabeth, sent the gift to Miss Coates with a handwritten note that has also, remarkably, survived all these years. It reads, "My dear Miss Coates, I write in great haste by command of the Prince Regent to beg you to accept the set of chrysolites which I send with this note. He hopes you will wear it at the wedding as a proof of his regard." It's an incredible piece of history, a direct link to this moment. But this story of royal gratitude takes a deeply tragic turn. Just 18 months after that happy wedding, the nation's joy turned to stunned grief. Princess Charlotte died after delivering a stillborn son. She was only 21 years old. Her death wasn't just a family tragedy, it was a constitutional crisis that threw the succession into chaos. It was this very crisis that set off the so-called royal baby race among George III's other unmarried sons to find wives and produce a new legitimate heir, a race that would eventually give the nation its next great queen, Victoria. And what of the Peridot set, the strange reward for a sad duty? It disappeared from public view. For 2 centuries, it was quietly treasured and passed down through the Coates family, a private memento of a public tragedy. It wasn't until November of 2012 that it re-emerged, put up for auction in the north of England by a descendant. The sale was intended to raise funds for the restoration of a monastery church in Muirfield, a quiet and noble end to its long silence. The set was so rare, so historically important, that when its new private owner applied for a license to take it out of the country, the British government stepped in. The culture minister, Ed Vasey, put a temporary export ban on it, declaring it to be of outstanding significance for the study of the history of jewelry. Thankfully, a deal was struck. With the help of the Art Fund and private donors, the Peridot parure was acquired by the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, where it was finally secured for the nation. And there it rests today, a perfect and complete capsule of a moment in time. Not only have the jewels survived in incredible condition, but so has their original red leather case and that very handwritten note from a princess sent on the eve of a royal wedding that was soon to be overshadowed by tragedy. The fact that this entire ensemble has remained together, untouched by time or alteration for over 2 centuries, makes it an exceptionally rare treasure. It is a direct and tangible link to a pivotal story in royal history, preserved for us all to see. But as we admire how perfectly this one set has survived, a thought might cross your mind, just as it has crossed mine. The royal invoice mentioned 2 sets of jewelry, one of peridot and one of amethyst, for the other sister. So what became of the amethysts? The honest answer is, we simply don't know. Its trail goes completely cold. Unlike the Peridot parure, which finally resurfaced at a public auction, the amethyst set may have been sold quietly and privately at some point, leaving no paper trail for historians to follow. Or it could have met the fate of so much antique jewelry over the generations. It's so easy for a set to be divided, a necklace altered, earrings given to one daughter, a brooch to another, until the original suite is scattered, its pieces impossible to identify as part of that original royal gift. But a part of me likes to believe in a quieter story. I like to think that perhaps, just like its green counterpart, the amethyst set is still out there somewhere, complete and treasured, being carefully passed down through another branch of the family, simply waiting for its moment to be rediscovered. Can you imagine if, one day, it did reappear? Wouldn't it be wonderful to see those 2 sets, commissioned together for 2 sisters, finally reunited after more than 200 years? Perhaps sitting side by side in the Victoria and Albert Museum? A lovely thought, isn't it? So the story of the Peridot set in Britain is a quiet one, a private footnote to a public tragedy. But if we travel from London to Vienna in the very same era, the story of Peridot changes dramatically. It leaves the shadows of royal confinement and steps into the brilliant, dazzling light of the Habsburg imperial court. Here, we're not talking about a modest gift for a governess. We're talking about a full, magnificent parure, a complete suite of jewels fit for an archduchess. It is a masterpiece of design and scale, comprising a breathtaking tiara, a substantial necklace with 7 detachable pendants, a pair of elegant girandole-style earrings, a large brooch, and a second corsage ornament to be worn on the bodice of a gown. If we trace its origins, the story of this parure begins in the mid-1820s. Its first owner was a young woman named Henriette of Nassau-Weilburg. In 1815, she married into one of the most powerful families in Europe, becoming Archduchess Henriette of Austria upon her marriage to Archduke Charles, the Duke of Teschen. Her husband wasn't just any royal. He was a celebrated military hero, one of the few commanders to have ever defeated Napoleon Bonaparte on the battlefield at the famous Battle of Aspern-Essling in 1809. He was a figure of immense national prestige, and his wife's jewels would have been expected to reflect that status. The parure was almost certainly commissioned from Kokert, the official purveyor of jewelry to the Habsburg court, whose work was renowned for its exquisite craftsmanship. In fact, just a few years after this set was created, the House of Kokert was bestowed with the prestigious title of Court Jeweler. The quality is simply breathtaking. The entire suite, crafted in the Georgian style from silver and yellow gold, is set with enormous high-quality peridots of a deep olive green, framed by scrolling patterns of cushion and rose-cut diamonds. The design is a masterclass in versatility. The 7 large peridot pendants on the necklace, for example, are detachable and can be mounted onto the tiara as uprights, completely transforming its look from a classic bandeau to a grand spiked Kokoshnik-style diadem. But for all its splendor, the parure's first chapter is a quiet and poignant one. We have no portraits or images of Archduchess Henriette wearing these incredible jewels. It's possible she rarely had the chance. She and her husband lived a relatively secluded life, raising their children away from the main Viennese court. And though she was a beloved figure, credited with popularizing the Christmas tree tradition in Vienna, her time with her treasures was tragically short. Just a few years after the Peridot parure was made, in 1829, Archduchess Henriette passed away from scarlet fever, which she had contracted while nursing her own sick children. She was only 32 years old. From there, the parure was passed down through the family, and by the end of the 19th century, it had come into the possession of Archduke Friedrich of Teschen, the grandson of Charles and Henriette, and it was his wife, Princess Isabella of Croe, who would become the face of these jewels. While Henriette was the first owner, it is Archduchess Isabella with whom the Peridot set is most famously associated, and for one simple reason: she was the first and perhaps the only royal lady to be photographed wearing the entire magnificent ensemble. It is her image draped in these deep green stones that has endured. One of the most iconic occasions where she wore the parure was at a ball for the coronation of Emperor Charles I of Austria as King of Hungary in 1916. There are photographs of her at the event and even a painting that was completed later, capturing her in all her glory. But it was a bittersweet moment. This event would prove to be one of the last great celebrations of the Habsburg dynasty. The world was at war, and their ancient empire was on the very brink of collapse. Just 2 years later, in 1918, the Austro-Hungarian Empire disintegrated. Like most members of the Habsburg dynasty, Friedrich and Isabella lost their titles and privileges. They fled to Switzerland and eventually settled in Hungary, but they managed to preserve their fortune and take the Peridot parure with them. But its time with the Habsburgs was coming to an end. Shortly after Friedrich's death in 1936, Isabella having passed away a few years earlier, the family sold the parure. Its new owner was a Czech nobleman, Count Johannes Coudenhove-Kalergi, who purchased it for his remarkable wife, Lily. And this adds another fascinating modern chapter to the jewel's story. Before her marriage, she was Lily Steinschneider, a true trailblazer, the first female pilot from Hungary and of Jewish origin, a fearless woman in a dangerous new world. The parure was eventually inherited by their daughter, Countess Marina. Perhaps understanding its immense value and history, she took a protective measure. For decades, she kept the jewels locked away in a bank vault, preserving them in pristine condition but also keeping them from the light of day. When Countess Marina passed away in 2000, the discovery of the complete parure in the vault stunned her estate managers. A decision was made to sell it, and in 2001, it was acquired by the renowned vintage jewelry company Fred Leighton, who famously loaned the necklace and earrings to the actress Joan Rivers for the 2004 Golden Globe Awards, bringing the historic jewels into the world of Hollywood glamour. At some point, the set, or at least a part of it, was sold to the great philanthropist Lily Safra. And this is where the story takes its final, saddest turn. In 2012, Mrs. Safra held a magnificent auction of her jewelry collection called Jewels for Hope, with all proceeds benefiting dozens of charities. As part of that sale, the earrings and one of the brooches from the Habsburg parure were sold. We don't know who the new owner is. And worse, we don't know what became of the tiara and the necklace. And so, a magnificent piece of history, once a complete and glittering whole, was scattered. We'll likely never see it all together again. So, the grand imperial parure of the Habsburgs, a complete and glittering suite, was ultimately scattered, its final chapter becoming a noble act of charity. And as you watch these magnificent historical sets get broken up or disappear into vaults, you start to see a pattern. It seems that Peridot, for all its beauty, has had a difficult time holding on to its place at the very top tier of royal jewelry, at least when it comes to the grand, formal tiaras and parures. But its story didn't end with the fall of empires. It simply moved into a new sphere. A world driven not by protocol, but by powerful personalities and personal taste. It became the choice of women of great style and influence, who were not necessarily reigning monarchs. A perfect example is this elegant tiara. It belonged to Catherine Ramsay, the Duchess of Atholl, a leading figure in one of Scotland's oldest and grandest aristocratic families. The tiara itself is a spectacular piece of Belle Epoque design, dating to around 1890. It features 5 large, beautifully cut peridots set among delicate, lacy scrolls of old mine and rose-cut diamonds. Like many great tiaras of the era, it was designed to be versatile, with fittings allowing it to be worn as a necklace as well. It was likely made by the royal jewelers, Collingwood, and was almost certainly a wedding gift to the Duchess from her husband, the 8th Duke of Atholl, a distinguished military officer. But the Duchess herself was a formidable figure. She wasn't just the wife of a duke hosting balls. She was a writer, a musician, and a pioneering politician, becoming the first Scottish woman elected to the British Parliament in 1923. This tiara isn't a heavy, formal state piece like the Habsburgs. It's a lighter, more personal ornament, perfectly suited for the grand social events of the era, like the Royal Caledonian Ball, where she was photographed wearing it in 1903. And its journey follows a familiar path for so many aristocratic jewels. The Duke and Duchess had no children, and after their time, the family treasures were eventually sold off. This tiara disappeared into a private collection for decades, a beautiful but forgotten piece of history, before making a surprise reappearance at a Doyle auction in New York in 2024. So, when we look at a beautiful piece like the Duchess of Atholl's tiara, it's clear that Peridot held a place of honor in aristocratic collections. The gem was genuinely fashionable in the Georgian era, and its popularity peaked when King Edward VII, a man who defined the style of his age, famously called it his favorite stone. This brings us to a fascinating question. If Peridot was so beloved, why don't we see more of it in the great royal vaults today? There isn't one single answer, but a combination of practical reasons. First, fashion is fickle. By the 1910s, the bright, airy green of Peridot was eclipsed by the cool, white glamour of platinum and diamonds, alongside the big 3 colored gems, rubies, sapphires, and emeralds. Semi-precious stones simply fell out of high fashion. Second, there was a supply issue. Finding large, perfectly matched peridots of a pure, rich green color, the kind needed for a royal tiara, is exceptionally rare. The supply of magnificent peridots simply couldn't keep up with the demand for other, more available gems. Third is durability. Peridot is a softer stone than sapphire or diamond, making it more prone to scratches and dulling over time, especially in a heavily worn piece like a tiara. For jewels intended to last generations, more resilient stones were often preferred. And finally, there's the harsh reality of jewelry history. Pieces were constantly being dismantled. An old-fashioned setting would be melted down, its stones reset into a new design. But when this happened, the major diamonds and sapphires were saved for the new creation. The peridots were often sold off, their royal history erased forever. The very fact that we can count the major surviving historical sets on one hand, like the Habsburg parure and the Atholl tiara, shows just how many were likely lost. But out of fashion doesn't mean forgotten. High jewelry houses like Cartier and Chanel never lost their appreciation for this unique gem and continue to feature it in modern creations. Personally, I've always loved the bright, vibrant green of this gemstone, and I can't help but feel it's a little underappreciated. But even though we don't see grand peridot tiaras anymore, the stone hasn't vanished from royal circles completely. It's still there, just in a different way. We see it now not in the vaults of inherited state jewels, but in the personal jewelry boxes of modern royal women, worn in a much more intimate and contemporary style. And if there's one modern royal who embodies this idea of personal style over dusty protocol, it's Queen Maxima of the Netherlands. She is a powerhouse of fashion, someone who is completely unafraid of bold choices and vibrant color. And she proves that peridot is the perfect gemstone for a modern, confident woman. She has at least 3 different pairs of peridot earrings in her collection, and each one tells a story about her personal taste. Let's start with what might be my favorite pair. They are this wonderful, leafy design from the American store Scully & Scully. They first appeared in 2019, and they are just a masterful cluster of textures and colors. 2 beautiful pearls of different sizes are nestled among bright green, pear-shaped peridots and tiny, sparkling diamonds. The entire design climbs up the earlobe in a very organic way, all set in warm yellow gold. Some might find them a bit bulky or heavy, but Maxima, with her statuesque presence, wears them with such ease and grace. It's a perfect example of a modern royal making a personal purchase because she simply loves the design. But her collection also includes pieces that play with texture in a really interesting way. Take these, for example. These are large, almost wreath-like oval earrings made from a multitude of tiny, vibrant green beads. They aren't about a single large gemstone, but about creating a bold shape and a block of vivid color. She often uses them exactly as they are intended, as a vibrant pop of color, a fresh and elegant accent to an outfit. You can see how she uses jewelry not just as an accessory, but as a key component of her overall look. And her collection continues to grow, showing her continued affection for the stone's cheerful hue. Recently, she debuted a 3rd, newer pair. These are much more classic and delicate, a charming floral stud with 6 pear-shaped peridots forming the petals around a central point. They are sweet, pretty, and a perfect example of how the same gemstone can be used to create completely different moods. When you look at Queen Maxima's choices, it's clear what's happening. For her, peridot is a gem chosen for its beauty, its vibrancy, and its joy. In her jewelry box, peridot has found a new, more exciting life. From the sun-drenched vibrancy of Queen Maxima, our story now returns to Britain and to a much quieter, more subtle appearance of peridot. This brings us to Catherine, the Princess of Wales. For her connection to the gemstone, we have to go back to April of 2012. The event was the London premiere of the Disney nature film, African Cats, and the then Duchess of Cambridge arrived wearing a charming pair of earrings from one of her go-to designers, Kiki McDonough. The earrings are part of the designer's classic collection, a style that Catherine is very fond of. The design is elegant and colorful. An oval, bright green peridot sits atop a slightly larger oval blue topaz stone. They are set in 18-karat yellow gold and are light, contemporary, and perfectly suited to her personal style. They were perfect for the occasion, adding just the right touch of color to her pale gray dress. But here's the interesting part for royal jewelry watchers. As far as we know, she has never worn them in public again. They made their one and only appearance that night and have since remained tucked away in her jewelry box. So, what an incredible journey for this gemstone. From a tragic reward tied to a princess's confinement to a joyful, personal choice for today's queens and princesses. It's a story that tells us as much about the women who wore the jewels as it does about the jewels themselves. I'd love to know what you think. Is Peridot a gemstone you'd like to see more of in royal collections? And which of these very different pieces was your favorite? The historic parure of the Habsburgs, or perhaps one of Queen Maxima's vibrant modern pairs? Thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this story, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel so you don't miss our next exploration into the world of royal jewels.